There's something different about people who experienced the Kennedy assassination as children. In a world where tragic news is instantly available but quickly replaced, these individuals lived through the most shocking moment of collective national grief in television history, and it shaped their psychology in ways that created the most historically conscious and tragedy-resilient generation ever to exist. Picture yourself at 8 years old on Friday afternoon, November 22nd, 1963. You in your third-grade classroom when your principal walks in with a strange expression and whispers to your teacher. Mrs. Johnson's face turns pale as she turns on the classroom television. Walter Cronkite appears, removes his glasses, and announces words that will change everything. From Dallas, Texas, the flash apparently official. President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. This wasn't just hearing sad news. This was the moment your understanding of America, leadership, and safety changed forever. The president, the most protected person in the country, had been murdered. If the president wasn't safe, what did that mean for everyone else? If adults were so shocked they couldn't explain what happened, what did that mean about their ability to protect children? Think about those 4 days between the assassination Friday and the funeral Monday. Every television in America broadcast the same continuous coverage. Normal programming stopped. Adults cried, walked around stunned, trying to explain something they couldn't understand themselves. You witnessed television bringing an entire nation together to share the same emotional experience simultaneously. This created what trauma psychology experts call collective grief imprinting. Unlike personal losses affecting individual families, the Kennedy assassination taught you that entire nations could experience trauma together, that some events affected everyone you knew simultaneously, and that television could create shared emotional experiences on a scale never before possible. Your family gathered around the television, not just for news, but for emotional support and shared processing of something too large for any family to handle alone. You learned that some tragedies required community response, that families needed connection with larger groups to process overwhelming events, and that television could serve collective healing. This developed mediated collective coping psychology. You learned that processing traumatic events was enhanced through shared viewing with others experiencing the same shock, that television could serve therapeutic functions during national crises, and that community emotional processing was as important as individual processing. But here's what made the Kennedy assassination psychologically profound. Beyond witnessing tragic death, you watched the most dramatic transfer of power in American history, seeing how democratic institutions functioned under extreme stress, and observing leadership continuity maintained when the unthinkable happened. Within hours of Kennedy's death, Lyndon Johnson was sworn in as president on Air Force One. The government continued functioning. The military remained under civilian control. Democratic institutions proved they could survive even the most shocking disruption. You learned that American political systems were designed to handle crisis, that individual leaders could be lost without destroying the entire system. This created institutional resilience awareness. You learned that political systems could survive individual tragedies when properly designed, that American democracy was stronger than any single threat, and that institutional continuity provided security even when individual leaders were vulnerable. Now imagine Sunday morning, watching live television coverage as suspected assassin Lee Harvey Oswald was transferred from Dallas jail, when suddenly Jack Ruby stepped forward and shot Oswald on live television. You witnessed murder happening in real time, on national television, while millions watched simultaneously. This second shocking event, while the nation still processed the first trauma, taught you that violence could erupt anywhere, anytime, even in controlled situations. That television could bring dangerous events directly into your living room, without warning. This developed involuntary exposure awareness. You learned that living in a media-connected world meant potentially witnessing traumatic events, without warning. That television could bring disturbing content into safe spaces, and that media consumption required emotional preparation for unexpected content. Perhaps most importantly, the Kennedy assassination taught you about the relationship between public figures and personal emotional investment. President Kennedy wasn't just a politician to your family. He represented hope, youth, progress, and the possibility that America could solve problems and lead the world toward a better future. His death felt like personal loss, though you'd never met him because television had brought him into your living room regularly, because his family seemed like an idealized American family, and because his vision had become part of your understanding of what your country could become. This created parasocial political bonding. You learned that effective political leaders created emotional connections with citizens who never met them personally. That political engagement involved feelings as well as policies, and that national unity could be built through shared. Kennedy's funeral taught you about ritual, ceremony, and collective healing during national trauma. The funeral wasn't just burial, it was national ceremony designed to help an entire country process grief, honor the dead leader, and begin moving forward together. You watched millions line the funeral route, saw world leaders gathered to pay respects, and observed how ceremonial rituals could provide structure when normal life seemed inadequate to address the magnitude of loss. This developed ritual healing participation psychology. You learned that formal ceremonies served important psychological functions during collective trauma, that participating in shared rituals enhanced individual processing of difficult experiences, and that communities needed structured ways to acknowledge major losses. The Kennedy assassination also provided early lessons about conspiracy theories and media speculation. In following days and weeks, television and newspapers filled with theories about who was really responsible, what the real motives might have been, and whether official explanations were complete. You learned that traumatic events often generated multiple conflicting explanations, that people wanted more complete answers than might be available, and that emotionally satisfying stories weren't necessarily more accurate than simple, unsatisfying explanations. This developed trauma response skepticism. You learned that major traumatic events generated multiple competing explanations, that emotional investment in theories could distort judgment about evidence, and that the most important information during crises was often the most basic facts. Years passed. Kennedy's assassination was followed by other national traumas. Martin Luther King's assassination, Robert Kennedy's assassination, Vietnam War, Watergate. But something from that first experience of collective national grief stayed forever, an understanding that nations could experience trauma together, that television could create shared emotional experiences, unifying entire populations, and that American institutions were strong enough to survive even the most shocking losses. Decades later, when other national tragedies occur, you approach these experiences with wisdom earned from living through the first and most shocking example of media-transmitted national grief. This isn't nostalgia for more dramatic times. This is recognition of a fundamentally different relationship with national identity, collective trauma processing, and television's role in creating shared emotional experiences that unified populations around common experiences of loss and recovery. Your Kennedy assassination childhood taught you that nations could grieve together, that democratic institutions could survive individual tragedies, and that television could serve collective emotional needs rather than just individual entertainment. That Friday afternoon when Walter Cronkite announced President Kennedy's death wasn't just news consumption, it was participation in the most significant collective emotional experience in American television history, a masterclass in national resilience and the power of shared grief to create lasting community bonds. Drop a comment and share your Kennedy assassination memory. Where were you when you heard the news? How did your family respond? What do you remember about those 4 days of television coverage? And if this resonated with you, hit like and subscribe because we dive deep into the psychology that explains how witnessing national tragedy shaped the remarkable historical consciousness and collective resilience you carry today. See you next time.